is able to send his son. And I think Socrates views himself as the one who gets out of the cave and comes up and comes back down. But God starts out on top and sends his own son into the cave for us. And I'm not comfortable with an abstract idea of goodness. I would prefer that that be a person who cares for me. And to me, Christianity is so much more satisfying on a relational level for that reason.
Another thing that jumps out to me immediately is that though there is a point of confluence around the life of the mind, I think, in Plato and Christianity, that part of our calling is, as Eric Metaxas was saying earlier today, is to explore truth. That's what it's about, is really trying to get to the truth. They agree on that. But ultimately, Socrates / Plato is saying this is a purely rational exercise. And so ultimately, if we can just educate you properly, with the right sequence of math in Plato's worldview, then you will then have the kind of intellectual discipline and formation necessary to see the good and the other forms as they are. And to me, that is just not the way that Christianity works, where there's a much more affective component to it. The kind of learning is much more, much better described, I think, as a wisdom than an intellectual ascent, if you will. I mean ascent up out of the cave. So that personal, all-in, emotional, affective, intellectual, holistic connection with truth is the Christian teaching. And that so much of it just seems to be absent, really, in Plato, where it's get your mind on track. This isn't ignorance. It's in you. Somewhere in you we can pull out that knowledge, but you just got to get your knowledge right.
Yeah, most Christians would agree that the will is fallen as well as...
Yeah, well said.
Yeah, it's not just a mind problem, it's a what I want to do problem. Even if I know what's right, I will do it. So what about you guys? We'd like to hear from you, critiques on how this relates to Christianity.
There's still a sense of hopelessness about these people, these prisoners, whereas with Christ there is not hopelessness. Our chains are gone and set free.
But it takes Christ descending down into the cave to set us free, yeah.
I have a question about the unknown they talked about here, or kind of the impersonal player who's being free, or who is freeing them. And at the very end, talk about what you described as kind of a vague, impersonal good. Do you think that Greek understanding follows the point when Paul went to Greece and found the temple to the unknown God? Is that unknown God the Greeks have, is that what Plato's describing here? That idea carried through?
I don't think I would make that connection. I think, at least in Athens and in Paul's account of that, I think what he's really getting to is that the Greek understanding of the divine world is, in his opinion, kind of ridiculous. Is that they're just trying to cover their bases. If there's no real engagement with the divine, it's more about, we got to make sure we're not offending somebody. So we'll even set up a temple to the unknown God, rather than that unknown God really representing Plato's God. I mean, that's what I'd say. So I wouldn't make the connection from the Mars Hill piece to this God. And Plato does elaborate on his notion of God in other places, in other dialogues, and fleshes it out a little bit more.
It's also important to note that Socrates dies for some of the views in here, so they're not universally held by the Greeks.
In our culture, we're familiar on a day-to-day basis with the dichotomy between the discussion of virtue as an entity of itself and virtuousness as expressed in a personal relationship and a personal God. Was that concept of a dichotomy even apparent in Plato and Socrates' time? Would they have even been aware of there being a choice there between how you look at that?
I'm not sure I understand the dichotomy well enough. Can you explain that a little bit more?
In secular humanism, if you don't go all the way down to just the morality has no relevance at all, you'll have people argue that there are non-religious reasons why we should have this and that morality. And And then you have people who say, well, it's based on the law and the prophets and that. And from our perspective, from a personal relationship with a personal God. But was that that conflict of two very different world visions or philosophical visions, did that even exist in that time as far as we know?
One of the things that Socrates is really concerned about is that the vision of the gods given in Homer shows them doing things like adultery, lying, cheating, killing or hurting their parents. So for them, the gods do not provide a secure basis for morality. And he and other thinkers recognize that, and they're trying to figure out a more secure basis for moral decisions, especially in a community context, because their view of God doesn't allow that. Is that kind of
sort
addressing?
of, I mean, Lewis would take it down the path of, okay, you have this want to. Why do you have this want to? And if they were looking at it, okay, well, these immoral gods don't meet our criteria, but we have this feeling that there should be this better thing over here. Did they talk about, is there anything in ancient literature about them actually discoursing over that kind of dilemma?
That's the entire Republic.
Okay.
Yeah.
I gotta read this.
Yeah, the Gnostic element jumps out to me right away as well. I'm wondering, this question, is there any evidence of influence from the Gnostics trying to take up Platonic view and putting it on top of the gospel as far as what they use? But before you answer that, the difference to me that stands out too is the lack of the recreation element that you have the scripture. So whereas in the story here, you're coming out of the cave, you're seeing things, and then maybe you're doomed to go back in the cave. A Christian temple on top of that would be, no, the cave changes. The cave gets, you stay in the cave, it's reborn, renewed, Jesus comes again, the new earth and so forth. So it's that, that strikes me as a big difference, is like the two others versus the recreation of what already is.
Yeah. Great observation, and it sort of gets back to that deep skepticism that Plato has about the material world. I mean, ultimately, it's to be escaped, which is just a disconnect with the notion of the Christian notion of renewal. And this really strikes me too, even though I spoke so highly of the way that he depicts the prisoners in their state of ignorance, that they're very flat, right? And the lived human experience is actually one of ambiguity and conflict. In a situation which I know should be better but can't be better. And so there's this inherent yearning to any human for something better, greater, and more transcendent. And Plato's prisoners don't seem to have that. They're just ignorant. And as soon as you can awaken them, okay, then they get the yearning. I think this gets right back to the difference, too, of what you're saying, that the renewal of creation is part of this yearning. We're caught in a brokenness that we know should not be broken.
Do you know if they're, on the first point, do you know if there are any ties to the Gnostics? Are they taking some of this and trying to interpose it on top of a Christian worldview? Is that working as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Which I think why 5th century Christians in particular started saying, no more Plato, he's dangerous. Because I think they began to see, oops, if you're just taking a Platonized view of Christianity, you change it into something that it's not.
And this is, I think, Lewis's real innovation in taking it and reclaiming it with the good view of the physical creation.
I just missed this, so maybe if I missed some of the reading, but when it talks about this whole line of, as for anyone who tried to free them and lead them upward, if they could somehow get their hands on them when they kill them, does he offer any further thought into maybe the reasons behind why people would be so resilient to something that somebody's describing as good, or oh, my eyes have seen so many good things? I know you talked a little about the will, but does he offer any other further thoughts as to why this promises something better, people still for the dark?
Well, this is within the context of a larger discussion about why philosophers should rule the state. And yes, the philosopher kings. Like Glaucon and Adimantus are very skeptical of this idea, because their idea of philosophers is that they're useless human beings who walk around talking nonsense. So is trying to say it looks like they're useless. Those people you see wandering around talking about these ideas don't seem to know what they're doing, but they actually have a much more accurate view of the world. So that's the context that his listeners are coming from. Does that help at all?
Yeah, I guess I'm just wondering, maybe a little bit about, just a little deeper in terms of the will, like why do they have that law, or why is that will there that they don't, that they would want to kill the person who's trying to give them, who came back to give them this news, as opposed to being open to embracing it?
What's resonating in my mind, and this may not be the right connection, but I'm thinking about other Platonic dialogues, specifically Crito, where you're dealing with Socrates' trial. This is one of the subtexts. He's speaking perfectly reasonably, although frustratingly, ambiguously. And really what I think Plato is suggesting is it's a variety of reasons. So some of it is laziness. Some of it is a power issue, so a threat to power and the social order and that sort of thing. So boy, this has implications that may be dangerous to what's comfortable around us and other things. So I'm not sure